My name is Stanislaw Robert Liberta with AV Ultra, and today we're going to take a look at creating 3D logos out of a 2D logo. So I am in Element 3D here, and what I've done is I've taken a Ducati logo that was originally a 2D graphic, and I have turned this into a 3D object. So you can see we've got some shading going on through here, we've got some reflection, and I've got my text standing off just a little bit. So let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new project, and I'm going to import two different kinds of files here because I want to take a look at two different workflows that we have here. The first one that we have here is just taking a pretty junky looking 2D logo. You can see I just grabbed this from the web, and it's not very good through here. You can see there's a lot of noise going through here. And then the second one I have here is a super clean, beautiful vector. So what we're going to do is first start with this PNG, because typically this is what I'm working with. I may have a logo from somebody and it's just drawn out and they just give me a JPEG and they're like, here, can you do something with this? So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead first and just create a new project, and I'm just going to make this whatever size my end result is going to be. So in my case here, it's going to be 1920 by 1080, and we're going to call this flat raster. And the reason why I'm calling it raster is just because it is a raster graphic, and I'm going to drop that right into my timeline here. Let's go ahead and make that a little bit higher quality so we can see what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer right away, and I'm just going to call this element by making a solid. And I'm going to place element on that solid. And the reason why I'm doing this is because, element is my 3D creation tool, and I want to take this 2D layer and make it into 3D. Easy, right? So how can I do that here? If I just tried taking element and telling element, hey, use this layer as a 2D object and make it a 3D object, there's no way for it to do that. The way element works is that it takes information from either text layers or mask layers to extrude things into 3D. As an example here, I'm going to turn off this layer really quick, and I'm just going to go ahead and make some text, and we'll just call this Ducati. And I can go into my element layer and set up my custom layers, texts and masks, and turn that into my Ducati. And I'll come into my scene setup, and I'll hit extrude. And there's my Ducati text. Great. Unfortunately, I can't do that with that 2D layer. And the reason is because there's not any information that element can use. So what do I do to get around that? Well, I'm going to go ahead and turn this back on. And we just established that we can only use text or masks to use this in element. So the easiest way is to just draw out this shape or break it down into these different shapes using my mask tool. So I'm just going to very quickly create a not so perfect one here just so we can kind of take a look at what this is. And I'll see you in just a second. Okay, so I've just made a general outline here of my shape, and you can see I've got my masks 1, 2, and 3. Now while I'm making my masks here, you can see they're not very precise, and that's okay for our purposes right now. I might want to go back and take a little bit more time and make this really precise, but I run into a couple problems when I'm doing that in After Effects. The actual pen tool is pretty good, but it's not as good as, say, Illustrators, where Illustrator is really designed to use that pen tool. I find that it's just a little trickier trying to get really precise lines in After Effects using that. And that may just be me. Maybe I'm not very good with that, and I'll totally own up to that. But let's take a look at what this is going to create for us. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to set my text and mask to that Ducati red logo, and I'm just going to turn that guy off because we don't need to see him. I'm going to go back into my scene setup, and we'll hit extrude. And so there it is. And the first thing you'll notice is that it's really kind of jerky in through some of these lines here. It's not very good. So what can we do about that? If I go to my extrusion model and I open up the tessellation tab that's right down here. We've got our extrusion and our tessellation. I can change this path resolution here from high to say ultra or even extreme. And you can see what that's done there. That's really smoothed out some of my layers there. So what I would do in this case is I would just keep going with this and extrude out my different sections. So I would work on the back section here to create this whole outline and make that separate. So what I would do is I would take this guy, duplicate it, and add a mask, and just 1, 2, right? So now this mask is just the outside layer, and this one is just going to be the inside layer. So we can go ahead and take that to 1 and 2. Let's rename them so they're not the same. All right. And I hit my extrusion. There's my 1, and then we'll extrude again and hit my second custom path. And so now I've got my 2 different pieces there. All right, just for our purposes here, I'm just going to throw on a material here so we can see what that looks like. And you can see that that's starting to shape up. But let's forget about all that right now, and let's take a look at another option here. So you saw just before I was taking the stuff by hand and masking everything out. Well, it'd be great if I can take this and just have it auto trace. In Illustrator, we've got a great function where I can drop in something like this and it will auto trace, and I can kind of set up some parameters for what it should be looking for when it auto traces. So if I select my layer here, I'm going to come up to my layer tab at the top of my screen. You just can't see it. And we're going to go to auto trace. And as soon as I hit auto trace, it gives me a couple options here. It'll search for luminance, and in that case you can see it's searching all the way around here. Or I can search by alpha, and so now that's just the outside. And I can search for just the red. So right now it's just pulling the red. For my purposes right now, I'm just going to hit luminance. And what this is going to do is save me some of my masking here. So I'm going to go ahead and open this back up, and now you can see I've got a ton of different masks in here. Now in reality this isn't going to work out too well for me, because how do I know which mask is which? I could go through something like this if it had a better edge. If I was able to clean up that edge just a little bit, then I can go through and just mask out, let's say, this text. So in that case, what I might want to do is mask out just this text here, right? And then we'll pre-comp it. And the reason why I'm pre-comping that is so that way if I auto trace this now, it's only going to take this information. So I can take this, and now I can open this back up, and let's find that one outside mask. Let's just get rid of this guy. And now it just has all this information. And that's perfect for me. So I can have my different letters. And now if I go ahead and extrude just this guy here. So we're going to go ahead and set this to the auto trace. Now you can see it's pulled out just that Ducati text. So that saves me a whole lot of extra work instead of having to go through and cut out each of those individual pieces. What I'd want to do in this particular case here is I would actually probably just trace out that outside and then that inside and separate my objects out like that. Now that's my workaround if I have a raster graphic where, you know, maybe my graphic isn't that great. Maybe I'll actually clean this up in Photoshop and pull it into different layers so that way I can make my masks a little bit better. Those are all different options. But what if you have a vector image like this EPS here, and we do the same thing? So if I drag my EPS down into this, and I'm just going to rename this here to vector. And if I take this same layer, notice we have auto trace. And here I can do the same thing, my luminance and everything. And now I've got my auto trace masks. I'm going to go ahead and pull that out. And that's perfect. So notice how many extra points I have in through here just from that auto trace. Can you see how clean that is? And when I was making that with just my pen tool, it wasn't as good. So that is another reason why I like having vectors, obviously because they're just a lot cleaner. But when I'm auto tracing them, it gives me better information. So if I come back to my layer element tab now, and I come back into this, and I extrude this out, look how clean those edges are. Now I have a slight issue here with this Ducati in here, right? Maybe I don't want that in here because I want that to be solid so my text is solid. Well, what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to open up this auto trace, right? And if I click on my different areas, I should be able to see which masks I'm grabbing here. So I'm in the A right now, I'm in the D. So let's start with 1. 1 is my top, right? So if I remove that guy, just my Ducati, and then I can see my green at the bottom here. Now there's just my text. Conversely, I can do the opposite. So I can get rid of masks 9 through 2 here, and now I just have that shape. I'm just going to duplicate this whole layer, and for this bottom one, we'll just call this top bottom shape. And I'll get rid of all that text in there. And now this will just be the text, and I'll do the opposite. So I'm going to take those masks and just get rid of 1 and 10. And I'm going to need one more for that outline, if you remember. So I'm going to come to that outline, and I'm going to auto trace this again. So again, I'm selecting it, going up to layer and hitting auto trace. And this time, instead of luminance, I'm going to hit alpha, because the alpha is the outside of that, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and hit that. And now I have a perfect outline for the outside. So now that I've got those 3, I'm going to come back into element and we'll start setting this up. So I've got my outside, I've got my top and bottom shape, and then my text. So let's go ahead and jump into element and see what we can do with that. First thing we have here, hey, there's our outside. And I'm going to hit extrude again and change my custom path to 2 and just pull that out here a little bit. And I'm going to hit extrude 1/3 time and make that my text. So here we go, 1, 2, and 3. I'll just pull my text up and through here and push this back just a little bit there. And now I can start applying some different materials here. So I've got some fairly basic ones right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and plop that onto there. And we'll make this chrome and my text chrome here. So right away you can see we've got a much cleaner, easier process of putting that together here. Now I'll probably want to work with this a little bit more. So for example, I like to rename my items right away here. So I'm just going to name this outside. Name this one top bottom. And make this my text. Now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and work with this bevel a little bit. So let's go ahead and zoom in on this guy here. I want to just work with just this edge. So I'm going to turn off these other guys for right now. And right now it's a little flat. It looks like just a little jagged still. So I'm going to jump back into that and fix its tessellation and its path resolution here, and just try smoothing this out a little bit. And as soon as I change that to extreme, that is quite a bit smoother there. I'm going to go ahead and jump into this bevel here and work with this just a little bit. So we have our bevel edges, which is going to expand that back and forth. So I'm zooming in onto this bevel here just so we can see that. Do you see this edge? If I crank up this bevel segments here, I can really start working with this bevel depth here. And what this is going to do is just round things off a little bit there. And I can do the same with this outside. So let's take this outside corner and let's zoom out so we can see what's going on here. And that looks pretty good so far, but let's go ahead and make that quite a bit larger. So I'm going to go ahead and crank that up to like say 20. And let's go ahead and give it quite a bit more depth there. So that's giving it that nice round edge. And while I'm doing that, I'm also going to pull in the extrusion on these, because what we're doing is we're making it quite a bit wider, but I just want that rounded edge in there. So let's take a look and see how that's starting to look. I think that's starting to look a lot better. And again, I can do the same with my Chrome text here. So I'll turn that on and let's zoom in on there. And I'm just going to go ahead and push that back a little bit and do the same thing with this guy. So we'll actually take this bevel size and pull in the edges here and give it a bit more of a curve. And it looks like that guy's just a little chunky in its resolution here. And you may have to come back and forth and work with some of these depending on your different raster. Now you can see it's really kind of tightened through here. So I have one other option that works for me when I'm actually making my masks from a 2D object. And what I tend to do is, I'll just hit OK for right now so we can compare this one with another one later. This is our vector that we created from inside After Effects. So this is where I just auto traced some of that stuff here. And what I'm doing here is I'm just going to make one new project here. Same kind of situation. We're just going to call this element again. I've got my element layer and I'm just going to make another solid here right away so we can apply some masks to this. And I'll just make this bright blue so we can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to jump into Adobe Illustrator where I've got that same logo we were just looking at here. And what I'm going to do is I've just selected the whole thing here. In fact, I can come into my comp layers here and you can see I've got everything selected. And I'm just going to hit Command C. And what happens is if I take that Command C, that clipboard copy path information, and I paste it into After Effects, you can see what it's done here. It's taken that perfect vector shape from Illustrator and just applied everything as a mask. Now, this is very similar to what I was just doing with the auto trace. However, if you take a look at this, my paths are just a little bit different. So if I take this information now, and I'm going to drop this same concept here into my element layer, I find that 9 times out of 10, this tends to be a much better result. So let's go ahead and set up my text and masks here. Set that to my blue solid. Scene setup and extrude. And to me, that looks great. So I would do the same principles that I was just doing before by breaking up the different masks. So I can come into here and open up this blue solid layer, and there's my outer mask. So I'll just hit Command D. So I've duplicated that. I'm just going to call this one outer and open up its masks and get rid of everything except for that first one. So now we have our outer mask. We can get rid of that here. And then we have our top and bottoms. Looks like this blue guy and this red one. So I can take these two. We'll duplicate them. I'm just going to make a note of that. And we'll call this one top, bottom. And I'm just going to delete them from this one here, which is our words or our text. And get rid of them here. So now I've got these 3 separate layers. And we want to just take our outer, our top and bottom, and our text. And the same concept that we just did before. So we already have one extruded here. There's our outer shape. I'm going to hit that again and set it to custom path 2, and hit it one third time and hit custom path 3. So we have our custom path 1, our custom path 2, and our custom path 3. I'll just come up to the front here. It looks like I pulled it out the other way. So there's our Ducati text, and there is our shape. So once you have this kind of set up, you can see that our paths are a lot better. They're a lot cleaner just from pulling it from Illustrator than doing an auto trace or maybe even drawing them by hand. Vectors are by far the best way to do this. However, if you are feeling really good and confident, I would actually trace your logo in Illustrator first and then copy and paste those paths into After Effects. I find that it is a much better result than if you just try to auto trace them or draw them in After Effects. For whatever reason, I find that the pen just isn't as good. So here I have that one that I put together with that After Effects path, and I've just applied a couple materials to it. One other thing I did with this here too is I actually took some of my materials, and once I dropped into this, I set up some different reflections. If you're in version 2.0, you should have access to these reflections, and I'll go ahead and I'll hit OK. And if you remember before, what I tend to do is I like to work with my physical environment and my shadows and ambient occlusion. So there you go. You have 3 different options here for working with 2D to 3D objects in After Effects with Element 3D. And here is my completed one. You can see, whoops. You can see I've got some completed reflections here. This is from the After Effects file that I had pasted. So my lines are pretty smooth. I've got some nice reflections, and it's very easy for me to work with it. You can see I've got that some extra lighting in through there, and that ambient occlusion really kind of kicks in right around these edges here, so I do recommend that. So there you go, you have a few different options for creating 3D logos out of 2D objects. So if you have any other further questions, or if there's other tutorials you want to see, feel free to drop me a line. Otherwise, if you like this tutorial, make sure you subscribe to AV Ultra Tutorials. And if you're looking for further training in After Effects, Premiere Pro, or Element 3D, be sure to visit my website, StanislawRobertLaberta.com.